Welcome, geeks worldwide. This is your boy Rico, your Sheik of Geek from Geek Wars, deciding right now to do a real quick review of the latest DC Universe's cinematic offering, which is Birds of Prey. Now, I'm going to try to be as brief as possible. That's my normal disclosure before every time I do one of these little audio reviews and things like that, because of course I'm way too deep in my geek knowledge and just being emotionally involved, and I don't want to be overly critical. I want to basically be as succinct as possible, be as fair as possible, and just try to get out the basic information as I get it. So when I review this, just keep in mind that there are spoilers, okay? So if you have not seen spoilers or anything else or any other things that tell you what the movie was about, or even seen the movie to get a clue about what the specifics are, if you don't like that, please turn this off right now, because I'm going to warn you that it's just basically what's going to happen during the course of this little mini review. I don't know how many it's going to be, but I'm going to try my best, y'all, because I tend to talk a lot about it. Go figure, right? So I will mention a couple other things here. First of all, besides the spoiler alert, they did actually change this. This is a week after the fact that it's been in movie theaters, Birds of Prey. They changed the title also to add in a little more, I guess, Harley Quinn-centric titling there, so that people who weren't aware of Birds of Prey, that it is a Harley Quinn movie. So now in all the movie theaters and all the posters and everything that's out now, they actually added a tagline, Birds of Prey and the fantabulous emancipation of one Harley Quinn. So when you see that, you already know off the top of your head that they're probably thinking the average person off the street probably doesn't know anything about the Birds of Prey franchise or the characters, or they may not even know that maybe some of their favorite characters or some characters they may have seen before on, let's say, for example, the CW TV shows are in this movie. So, that being said, I'm just going to go right into it and just jump in and tell me my quick thoughts on certain things. First of all, let's talk about the storytelling. I found it really interesting. I'm putting my air quotes, you can't see that right now, that they decided to use what I call a stop and start method of storytelling, which means that all of a sudden they would be in the middle of an action scene, middle of a random scene, and me personally, I was left thinking, why is this happening? And in the middle of the scene, the character, which is usually Harley Quinn, says to the audience, oh wait, let me go back and I'll rewind real quick and let me explain why this is happening. And it'll say, oh, flash forwarding, let's say 4 minutes earlier or a day earlier or something of that nature, to explain why this character just all of a sudden jumped into a screen, or hey, why is this person all of a sudden shooting up the place, and hey, this is why this person exists. That was frustrating as hell to somebody like me who likes linear storytelling. I didn't get it. I mean, it was frustrating. I literally did not find that interesting at all, and I'm going to admit one thing that I don't normally admit. I started nodding off at that part because of the fact that every time he did it, I literally started nodding off. My wife, who was sitting next to me, who is not a comic geek in any way, shape, or form, literally was sitting there like, oh, I'm going to let him nod off for a second. There's probably a reason why he's nodding off, especially to something like this that he normally enjoys greatly. But yeah, it literally just took away from the momentum of the movie, in my personal opinion. So stop starting every time there was a new character introduced onto the screen. Didn't do anything for me. I didn't understand why the story writers, the screenwriters went that way. It doesn't work for every genre. So even when Quentin Tarantino does things like that, he does it in order. So I don't know if they were trying to do something like that and then just pieces it together, but it was really weird. And I thought it was really uncomfortable storytelling for the kind of movie that this is. So it really didn't do anything for me. So storytelling wise, I found that very frustrating. I also was wondering, and this is probably something that I don't know if anybody really cares about, but just something I knew right away. Why was there so much damn cursing? Kind of ironic I say it that way, right? There was a lot of cursing going on. I mean, there were F-bombs right out the gate. I mean, as soon as this movie started. So, and don't get me wrong, I'm not a prude, but it kind of felt like they were cursing for the sake of cursing. I mean, every time somebody jumps in there, they were dropping F-bomb this, F-bomb that. And I really didn't see that it was necessary. especially when you've seen, for example, let's say Harley Quinn. You've seen her in other movies, like, for example, well, I should say one other movie specifically, which is Suicide Squad, which I will allude to a little bit in a minute there. Yeah, she didn't have to curse like that. And she had a very compelling character, you know, scene stealing in some places, depending on who you talk to and how you look at the overall novella, that, if you want to call it that, of the storyline. So, gratuitous cursing, I was like, yeah, I don't want to say it made me feel uncomfortable, but I just felt like it was just too much. So, unless you're like a sailor on shore leave, what's the point, right? Okay, let's just dive into a couple of the characters themselves here. Let's start with the main one, Harley Quinn. I don't get her visually. And when I say that, what I mean is, if you can kind of draw a comparison to Suicide Squad, right? For those of you who've seen Suicide Squad, which most people probably have at this point, right? So I don't think that's a major spoiler alert because you've seen it by now. It's been out for a little bit. So I'll say this much. You can probably remember she was kind of a sexy maniac, if that makes sense to say that way. So basically, you know, you gave an origin story in there, and they said, oh wow, this is what she looked like. But yeah, she was more of a femme fatale in that one. I think most people would agree that she was very, you know, attractive, but she was also like a little off, you know what I mean? But at the same time, it was almost likable, right? I don't get what they did with her in this comic book adaptation movie. It really didn't make sense to me. They went so far left to what they did in the last movie. I don't know if it had to do that Margot Robbie was producing and she wanted to do something different, but really staying true to the character, it just felt forced, honestly. What I mean by that is, I really felt no empathy for her. Like in the first one, you kind of got the idea that she was basically, you know, kind of led down this path by the Joker to some extent. You know, maybe she wasn't the most stable person, but, you know, it kind of presented it that way. I kind of felt that they made it till she was crazy for crazy's sake. At the very beginning of the movie, she gave her own self-narration, like a mini biography, saying, yeah, I was always off, and I was always doing this when I was a kid, and yeah, and I basically was this and this and that, and, you know, she was raised in different orphanages, and she basically said she was always crazy. I'll just break it down that way, which I don't get, because, I mean, how are you going to be crazy, but also become, you know, get your PhD in psychology and I'll do all that crap? Yeah. So it doesn't make sense to me in that respects. So as far as her being a femme fatale, they made her look like basically she was just this punk rock, like, I don't know, roller derby chick that had nothing to do with anything with the first appearance in Suicide Squad. So I felt no empathy for her. I felt no real attachment to her character, and it just felt like they just threw her in there. Now, don't get me wrong. I know that I've read the comics of Harley Quinn, so some of it is kind of relating to where she lives and what she did in the comic, but the average person off the street won't know this. So it felt like it was just coming out of left field. Now, visually, I really didn't understand what they went with there either, because the way I kept thinking about it is, you remember how in Suicide Squad, everybody was weirded out by Jared Leto's version of the Joker, because he was basically what most people called like punk rock Joker, I guess, for lack of a better way of saying it. I mean, he had facial tattoos, you know, his hair slicked back, and he was kind of like visually just totally different from what we've ever seen before. And I don't say that in necessarily the most complimentary way, but they kind of made Harley Quinn like that. I mean, she had a face tattoo, she had tats everywhere, like out of nowhere. Different than her first view in Suicide Squad. Like I said, she didn't really come off as overly feminine. That makes sense to say it that way. I mean, she was really just some chick that was all over the place. So, in terms of Harley Quinn, visually and character-wise, it just felt like, oh, okay, you kind of went over the top a little bit, and you went totally left, but all right, let's see who else we got to talk about. So I'll just take my deep breath and move on. If you know anything about Black Canary, of course, is in this as well. Black Canary, as you know in the comics, is portrayed as by Dinah Lance, and she, of course, has her canary cry, is an extreme martial artist, and she's just basically one of the coolest female characters out there. So in this one, she just seemed like a generic bad girl. What I mean by that is, I mean, she's a nightclub singer, and she just happens to know how to fight for some reason, which they never really, at least in my mind, I didn't really catch that they explained it. Why she knows how to fight all of a sudden, and she became the driver for Black Mask. So, oh, okay. That had nothing to do with anything I've ever heard of Black Canary. I could be wrong, but which I have been before. But I will say this much. The average person is like, oh, she's just some nightclub singer. I really just found it very bland. I mean, they really didn't do anything with her character that said anything that was unique. She was generic bad girl until, again, this is a spoiler alert, until the last ultimate fight, which basically, you know, Renee Montoya, which we'll talk about that as well, Officer Montoya, made a comment of, you know what you gotta do. So apparently she's the only one who knows that she has a canary cry, which she eventually used at the very end, but for some reason she used it and she passed out. So it kind of implied that she never likes to use it because she, you know, it's damaging, but she also knocks herself out, which I've never heard of. But so there's Black Canary. But I will say one last thing: the CW show, like the Arrowverse, definitely did a much better job. I mean, I had no real connection to her character except that I know about comics and I know some information about her background. So I'll say this much: it was okay. But CW did it better, which is probably my overall theme on a lot of this stuff. Moving right along, since we mentioned Officer Renee Montoya, played by Rosie Perez. My overall reaction is meh. It was okay. I mean, it wasn't bad. It was nice seeing Rosie Perez, you know, out there doing some things. I mean, it's good to see her in a recent acting role, since I don't think personally I've seen her in anything recently. But she kind of was this whole 80s, I guess, cop caricature. That's a better way of saying it. And they kept trying to push that button of, okay, let's give her some cheesy dialogue, but it was an ongoing joke. So I was like, oh, okay, generic cop. So there was nothing that told me that she in the comics was eventually going to become the Question, and that, you know, her alcoholism kind of was briefly touched on. That she drank a couple things, you know, a couple times in there, but it wasn't really, you know, what was going on. Of course, her personal relationships, if you know anything about that. If not, Google that. And there was really nothing there. So she was, I guess, generic buddy cop number 8, or whatever you want to call her. All right, moving on. Let's go on to probably my, if you want to call it my biggest disappointment, the Huntress. Played by, what is her name? I just blanked out on her name. Just because I'm so upset with this part. Now, if you remember through Huntress, and if you know anything about her background, she's a former member of a mafioso family that got gunned down, and she decided to get revenge as the Huntress and hunt her family's murderers down, eventually becoming a member of the Justice League at some point under the tutelage of Batman and all this other stuff. Basically, she was a badass. So she was played by, and I'm blanking out on her name, and probably they'll probably come to me at the end when I'm done as usual. But she also played in Scott Pilgrim, that movie. She, you know, Ramona Flowers. Yeah, I'm blanking out because, of course, I'm on the spot. But you know who I'm talking about. I was really looking forward to her because I wanted to see what her take was going to be on there. Yeah, it could have done better. I wonder if she ever read anything about the Huntress or looked at how they portrayed her. Number one, they had a running gag, I guess, for the movie. So every time she entered in, which seemed like it was just random jump-ins into a scene, they had this thing where they were just trying to say her name. And she would start the conversation with, "They call me," ... and she'd pause, and everybody would jump in and was, "Oh, you're the crossbow killer." And she'd get mad and just say, "No, I'm not the crossbow killer." So it was a running gag there that, it's like I felt like it was okay at first, but then it kind of felt like it dragged on. So yeah, she eventually was telling people, "Yeah, my name is a Huntress." And at the end they were like, "Yeah, it's a badass name." But yeah, okay. I thought that was an attempt at levity, but whatever. Anyway, but my main thing there is, why did they give her such a baggy outfit? She looked like she was basically in hammer pants half the time, or like, you know, a P. Diddy, you know, video with like the shiny workout tracksuits and shit. So yeah, why are we doing the baggy outfits? If you've seen anything by the Huntress, her outfits, they're usually form-fitting at least. depending on which one you go with and what artist is drawing her, she's basically, you know, form-fitting either leather outfits or like something as tactical, right? You know, with the obviously the comic book tradition of, you know, 30 million pockets in a pouches in a belt buckle or something like that, a utility belt, if you want to call it that. Yeah, she just looked like some chick that just walked around with a crossbow who just happened to come out of, like, I don't know, a sports fisherman shop that just happened to have a crossbow in it and bought the baggiest thing she could find. It was confusing to me. So that was this most disappointing, because I think that the Huntress character was also approached in the Arrowverse, and they did it pretty well. I mean, you know what I'm saying? I mean, don't get me wrong, they don't always get it right 100%, but something I've noticed, and this is my generic concept here, it seems like the CW shows, for some reason, on a smaller platform with a lesser budget, seem to do these characters more justice than the DCU. So my biggest disappointment personally was the Huntress. Now, there was another character there, which I don't know if the average person will really even understand or even care about, but it kind of annoyed me, and I told wifey this after we left, and she was like, agreed with me. Cassandra Cain. In this movie, she was this teenage Asian pickpocket who happened to steal a diamond that they were all fighting over the whole movie, right? So again, this is a spoiler alert, so basically she ends up being the main person the story rolls around with, because everybody's trying to get to her / protect her and all this jazz, right? Does anyone even know that she's actually in the comics one of the persons to don the cowl, so to speak, to get the persona of Batgirl? I mean, Cassandra Cain in the comics is a badass. She just seemed in this movie like a generic Asian girl who happened to have a cast, an arm in her cast, which they, by the way, didn't never even explain why does she have her arm in a cast. They never even said anything about her or said, hey, okay, why is she going to stay with Harley Quinn or hang out there? It felt like, okay, they just went for diversity and said, little Asian girl, throw her in there. I mean, she was cussing up a storm like a madman as well, so that's another thing there. But that version of Batgirl is actually so badass in the comics, because I believe her parents were this assassin whose last name is Cain, which I can't think of his first name, but I believe her mother was Lady Shiva, which is one of the few peoples who could probably whip Batman's ass in martial arts. So, you know, she was also a mute, so she couldn't speak, and she was illiterate, I believe, off the top of my head, and also she was just one of the world's savage, you know, martial artists. So she eventually became, you know, Batgirl for a while there, and I believe she eventually took her father's persona as Orphan after she gave up the Batgirl persona. So someone out there, feel free to, you know, correct me on that if that's something that isn't it. But why did we have to have her and make her so generic? I mean, she wasn't even dark. She didn't wear dark clothes. She was wearing pink outfits and bright stuff and sparkly, and just some chick who happens to have to. Oh, by the way, she swallowed this diamond, by the way. So the whole running gag with her is they're trying to make her poop it out their whole movie. Great character persona, DC. So yeah, I mean, you went from having potentially one of the most lethal characters you could deal with as a female, and made her a little generic caricature of a Asian chick who steals and has to poop. Wow, good job, guys. All right, so finally, as far as characters, I just want to touch on Black Mask. For those of you who don't ever read this or don't know much about him, in the comics, Black Mask is basically one of the fiercest gangster mob leaders, if you want to call him that. Simon Sionis, I believe his name is how you pronounce his name. So he basically adopts this Black Mask persona after, I guess, being a big whiny baby, for lack of a better way of saying it, and doing all his own jazz and basically becoming a whiny person, and at some point, very similar to Marvel's Red Skull. He wears a mask so long, at some point, it becomes fused to his face. I believe he actually gets it burned in some accident, that somehow it burns to his face, so he just keeps it that way. So, he's kind of a badass. He's good with guns, especially, from what I understand. Well, in this movie, played by Ewan McGregor, known as Obi-Wan Kenobi in the Star Wars universe in the prequels, right? So, you don't know what you're going to get with that. He kind of came off as a flaky club owner who at one point just decides to throw on a mask and go on a shooting spree. So in my opinion, they could have spent a little more time explaining that, took it a little more seriously. I thought it was just really a very lighthearted look at a very dark guy. No pun intended, because he's Black Mask when I say dark, but he actually has a very dark backstory as far as what happens, what led him to be who he is, and why he is. So it took a really blah attitude. I mean, I was again walked away with that particular character as meh, because he kind of seemed like they were just throwing him in there, and they didn't really give a real big reason why he was so dark. So I'll let it there. It kind of felt forced. Now, one other thing, just generically talking about this movie, I thought it was kind of weird. Even though they kept throwing in every once in a while, somebody would call them, "Oh, my birdies" and stuff like that. They never actually, at least I never caught it, that they never actually said Birds of Prey in the movie. Yet the movie is called Birds of Prey. So how are you gonna have a movie called Birds of Prey and never actually say the words? It felt forced. It felt weird. It felt, I don't know, like generic girl power movie, like I said at the very beginning. So I mean, it was very girl-centric, I guess, if you want to call it that. It was, I don't know, like Thelma and Louise goes even worse and badder. I don't know, but it just felt like they put together a female movie. I don't know, just because they wanted to put a female movie out and milk out the Harley Quinn thing, even though they didn't really have the same Harley Quinn. They changed the whole character, even though it's the same person acting, good old Margot Robbie, which, you know, you can't really complain about Margot Robbie. She does what she does. But why would you change it so dramatically? So, in the end, there's 3 words that I come out with. Why, DC? Why? It sounds harsh, right? But I got to tell you, that's what I walked out the theater saying to it. I actually walked in while my wifey was running to the restroom. I was talking to the usher outside, and he just asked me, "Hey, you just came out of there. How'd you like it?" Because I didn't get a chance to see it. I just said, simply, yeah, why, DC, why? And he's like, what? So I ended up having to have a conversation with him for a couple minutes, explain to him, you know, spoiler alert, tell me now if you don't want to hear spoilers. He just said, no, just tell me. And he's the guy that works at the freaking place, and he didn't get to see it yet. And I just explained to him kind of what I told you guys, and I just shook my head and just kept asking, why, DC, why? Why do you allow your TV versions of your character to be so much better than the DCU, the movie versions of it, where you spend so much more money? I don't get it. They do so much great animation stuff, right? So, if you're asking me what I'm going to give this star-wise, rating-wise, out of 5 stars, I'm going to give it a 1. I'm going to be honest with you. If you actually never saw this movie, you're not missing much. So I will say this much: if you're good at watching car crashes, things that you don't want to have explained to you, this might be the movie for you. But I'm a gasp. I mean, it felt like it was a rushed movie, like they made it just to make it, which is never a good movie, in my opinion, and is never a good reason to make a movie, especially when you're, you know, on the cusp of such great movies. I mean, you have the Wonder Woman movies, you know, you have other things like that have come out that you've had, you know, some recent success with. So I don't get it. Why would you do this? Why, DC? Why? And I'm gonna leave it at that, okay? Because I feel like I've been talking enough. I mean, geez, we're over 20 minutes now, and I said I was gonna be brief. So that's my disclaimer. I tried, but you know what happens when you have the floodgates open, right? But hey, in my defense, I could have talked a lot more in depth about everything else, but I'm going to leave it there. So, if you like what you heard, if you have a comment, if you have a question, if you have an opinion, if you have seen this movie and just want to say, Rico, Sheik of Geek, what are you talking about? Well, hey, do so below. So, like this post, comment on it, share it. Also, don't forget to check out my Facebook page over at Geek Wars. That's Geek Wars, W-A-R-Z, like zebras, even though we don't collect zebras. So if you like all your geek action, whether it be memes, whether it be comic book news, sci-fi, wrestling, everything else story-wise that you want to go with on that, check it out. Ask for membership, spread the geek gospel, and like I always say, from your boy Rico, your Sheik of Geek, so let it be written, so let it be geek.